Okay, hi there and welcome to another video. We're going to focus this time on some Keynesian insights relevant to the coronavirus crisis. We're living in an age of great uncertainty. As this chart shows, this is the Policy Uncertainty Index for the United States, reaching new highs we haven't seen certainly since the last recession. And if you look at people's Google searches, this is just in the UK, and it shows that the search for recession is the peak popularity for that term across this period shown. Indeed, if you think about the searches for economic depression since 2015, again, this is the peak moment in terms of people putting economic depression into a Google search engine, and perhaps that's a lead indicator of a significant change in consumer and business sentiment. In many nations, there will be a return to mass unemployment. Expect the numbers across many countries to shoot up in the days and weeks ahead, hopefully relatively short-lived. But just in the United States last week, over 3.5 million people, way above the norm for the last 60 years, over 3.5 million people made an initial claim for unemployment assistance. So here are some Keynesian insights into where we are with the crisis. The first insight is that monetary policy can and does have a part to play in supporting aggregate demand, but Keynesian economists would argue that actually sometimes, even when interest rates are very low, perhaps even at 0%, those low interest rates and quantitative easing by central banks, they may actually have a limited impact on demand because of the so-called liquidity trap. Now, the liquidity trap is when the banking system has plenty of cash, plenty of liquidity, but is unwilling or unable to lend, perhaps because they're required to hold more back in Tier 1 capital, perhaps because they fear an increase in the default rate if they lend to a small business or to a potential mortgage borrower. So banks are unwilling to lend, and private sector businesses and households, well, they're low on confidence, their animal spirits is weak, and therefore they're more concerned with reining back their spending, being a bit more frugal, cutting their debt and cutting back on spending. So even if interest rates are low, people, businesses and banks are unwilling to take advantage. The second important Keynesian insight is that animal spirits drive consumer spending, saving and planned investment by businesses. Animal spirits are absolutely crucial to this whole story about how we get through and then hopefully come out the other end of the economic crisis. If animal spirits worsen, fears of a slump can actually become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, animal spirits is a Keynesian concept. It refers to a mix of confidence, trust, mood and expectations among any economic agent. Could be a firm, could be a household. And the Keynesian insight is that animal spirits can move very quickly as populations of people in the business community change their thinking. There are quite often quite volatile mood swings. In particular, when animal spirits and confidence is low, people tend to save more, businesses save more, and because demand and profits therefore take a hit, people are holding back, waiting before they commit to spending. That leads to businesses cutting back on production, and often they postpone or cancel planned investment projects. Higher saving and reduced investment causes a fall in demand and the circular flow, a reduction in incomes and output, thereby causing an economic contraction. Another Keynesian concept is the so-called paradox of thrift. It's good to save. Saving provides you with a buffer against uncertainty. But if we all save more, the paradox is we may end up with less to save. So it's rational to save more at times of uncertainty, so the household savings ratio goes up, but for a given level of income that causes a fall in spending, which then leads to a fall in aggregate demand, which brings an increased risk of a recession, perhaps a depression, and if GDP per head goes down, incomes per capita fall, and if people have less income per capita, then there's less money for people and businesses to save. The third insight is that the state, the government, has a key role to play in supporting the economy and not just relying on automatic stabilisers, An automatic stabiliser, for example, is when unemployment goes up, people get some welfare benefits which stabilises their income, or the government takes less in tax and runs a bigger budget deficit. In a sense, that's an automatic stabiliser. Keynesian insight is that the public sector, the state, has an absolutely key role to play in supporting the economy, particularly if monetary policy has become less effective. When private sector demand collapses, insight number 4, the public sector, mainly via fiscal policy stimulus, needs to intervene. The Keynesian insight is free market forces do not necessarily equilibrate the economy. You can't rely on the free market to lift a country out of a recession. The 5th insight is a more general one. Keynes was somebody who was willing and able to challenge the conventional wisdom. He famously said that escaping from old ideas is difficult. People become wedded to one view of the economy, and that policymakers need to be bold and perhaps challenge the default on policy. An interesting article here from Lance Taylor, quoted in the Twitter feed of the Institute for New Thinking. The initial impact of COVID-19 has been to annihilate labour income through the loss of jobs. The challenge is to create demand to offset lost wages and consumer spending. Although Keynesian author, biographer, Keynesian economist, Professor Robert Skidelsky does say there's actually nothing particularly Keynesian about the UK government's package to protect the economy. Any government will spend freely to protect its people against public health disasters. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Keynesian style response. Well, this perhaps is a moment to think about the cost of government borrowing. This is the yield on 10-year government debt issued by the UK government, and the yield has been below 1% for a little while, certainly below 2% in the last 3 to 4 years. So some people are saying that this is a moment, this is an opportunity in a Keynesian sense for the government to be aggressive in the use of fiscal policy, to increase the size of the deficit and stimulate demand, because the cost of borrowing is at historic lows. And certainly if we think about what some countries have done, including the UK, there has been a noticeably Keynesian response to the crisis. We can see, for example, the immediate injections of extra spending into public healthcare, the government doing whatever it takes to increase spending on ventilators, protection equipment, PPE, and much else besides. The government introduced a wage subsidy of up to 80% for furloughed workers to maintain employment, and that now includes the self-employed. The government's deferred businesses having to pay VAT until the end of June, and also a deferral of income tax for nearly 5 million self-employed workers. In Germany, traditionally the bastion of balanced budget orthodoxy, they are jettisoning, in other words, getting rid of a long-held commitment to a balanced budget. The United States has just introduced a $2 trillion fiscal package, which in part injects money directly into millions of household budgets. So we are seeing a quite significant fiscal response here. In that sense, it's a Keynesian response, but as Skidelsky argues, it's not particularly Keynesian to do this. Most governments would do this. It's about keeping the lights on and preventing the economy from suffering a cardiac arrest. There are, of course, big challenges. How large will the fiscal deficit reach both in the UK, in Germany and the United States? Will we have, for example, by 2020 a 10-15% budget deficit as a share of GDP? What will be the consequences for the level and the scale of national debt? Who will pay the higher taxes needed to control the national debt as a country comes out of the recession? Are there big risks of a surge in inflation? Particularly if a fiscal stimulus is financed by the central banks, including the Bank of England, effectively purchasing new government debt. Will these fiscal stimulus policies actually work? How effective will they be? How large does the stimulus have to be? Of course, much depends on actually resolving the public health issue in the next few months. And what about the post-crisis position? Will the stimulus be then followed by a period of austerity, as we saw after the global financial crisis, or have lessons been learnt from austerity, a decade-long period of austerity post-2009? Well, these are questions for the future, But I think it's quite important to think about some Keynesian insights, particularly the role of the state as an active supporter and stabiliser of demand, of incomes and jobs, as you work through the economics of what is a remarkable and very difficult time. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for joining in this video.